Hello, and welcome to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your board game doctor today. In this video, I'm going to go over my first impressions of Ostia. Now, this is a game that was kickstarted back in 2022, I believe, and was fulfilled last year, and so this counts as a game from last year, and has received a lot of buzz lately, so I wanted to demo this and give you my first impressions. So, to quickly go over what this game is about, as well as including the expansion material from the Pirates expansion that I want to talk about, you are essentially using a Mancala system of action taking, where if you're not familiar, you pick up the pieces that are in a sector, you gain resources based off of that sector, and then move your pieces, one by one until you place your final piece in a certain sector, and then you get to take that action. That's a very simplified approach to what this game is all about, but you are using these actions to do many things, such as build buildings onto your little tableau here. You are moving your ships across the ports of ancient, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean ports here, all represented by different cities, and you are hoping to allow access to be able to take buildings from these places to be built onto your tableau and elsewhere, but also to get these ships over to the end of these faraway lands to gain victory point conditions to earn. You are also doing a little bit of set collecting with these orders. You're spending resources to fulfill orders based off of these cards. And then you're also advancing along this track too, based off of the number of items that you collect, as well as the different buildings and ships that you have as well. You are gaining a certain amount of points, more so if you advance farther along this track. Now, with the Pirates expansion, a few additions are made to the game where you have pirates on your ships, and I'll go back to the main board here. So you have these black and red ships. You need to have a certain amount of military might to be able to repel and pass them. And if you do so, you gain treasure from them, as well as you flip over events that will be randomized and take place randomly. And then you also can, over on your board, keep track of those that military strength here, but also hire legionnaires to help give you a foundational boost to your military might. You have these disgrace tokens that are based off of these starting cards that give you some asymmetric powers during the game, and you can get rid of these to gain essentially 7 points at the end of the game. And then finally, you have this board over here where it serves as a randomized assortment of different buildings or locations where you can build buildings in addition to your own personal tableau, which essentially gives you some efficiencies along the way. So that's a basic overview of what Ostia is all about. Now let's get into some game comparisons. So the first game that I want to compare this to is Yokohama. First of all, both games are of Japanese origin when it comes to the design. Hisashi Hayashi is the designer of Yokohama, and Tatsuka Chuo is the designer for Ostia. I failed to mention that before. But, maybe this is an early impression to the philosophy behind some of these bigger Japanese games, but when it comes to a more Euro-style mechanism, you have a lot of setup randomization to make each game feel different. In Yokohama, you arrange your modular board with the different districts of the city being in different locations, really affecting how the worker placement and movement is happening in this game. Versus here, you have a lot of different tiles in terms of these, for example, darker tan orange tiles that give you certain abilities or endgame effects if you construct or pass these buildings. And so all of this is randomized, and so they'll be in different places. If they reappear from game to game, they might be in a different spot, so that might affect your choices for where to send your ships and what line to draw through them. As well as some of these tokens, these will be randomized to, if you land on them, give you different resources that may or may not be useful from game to game as well. And there are a plethora of other things that are different in the setup randomization that I find very, very similar between these two games. So the next game that I want to compare to is Concordia, mostly for its theme and setting. I think both games are set around the same time frame and time period of ancient Roman Empire / Mediterranean merchants trading kind of theme, right? But also, there's kind of an element of set collection in both games. In this one, you're spending resources to collect certain cards, and hopefully, if you collect the right amounts of icons, that could affect how many points you get. But in addition to that, there is an element in Concordia where you are trying to collect a certain type of card as well. And the more that you collect of that type of card, the more that you will compound and score from them. And I find that kind of similar in this game, where as you progress along this scoring track, if you do happen to focus on certain aspects of the game, you will be able to get more points out of those particular icons and resources than any of the others. And so track advancement is important in this game. In a sense, it's not really a track that you're going along, but you're collecting cards in a set collection type of experience in Concordia. So I guess in terms of theme as well as the feel for how the mechanisms come together to score at the end of the game, felt pretty similar to that. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not compare this game to Trajan, a Stefan Feld game from years ago that just fell out the top 100 if I'm not mistaken. But both games utilize a Mancala-based system to take your actions with. I could compare this game as well to Five Tribes, but in terms of theme, this one aligns more with Trajan because in actuality, the rulebook for Ostia mentions the Emperor Trajan. And so this literally takes place in like the same time frame as Trajan. But in addition to that, just as a quick, interjection for impressions, I feel like the elements of this Mancala system is connected a lot more one to another than it feels like in Trajan. It's been a while since I've played this game, but I did come away with the impression that Trajan and its action selection system was a collection of mini games, as it were, that felt a little disjointed one from another. I think there is probably more of a connection among those mechanisms if I were to dive deeper into it, but I just feel like on first impressions, it was a lot more connected in this game where, for example, collecting the resources, these permits to move your ship, was important to move along the track on the central board so you can have spaces to, build your buildings take buildings from and place them, but also to gain resources to allow for trading, which is pictured in this section, allow for flexibility in what you can spend your gold on, etc. Right? And then to get more ships out there, you have to build more ships, and so on and so forth. Right? And so it's all really smartly intertwined in Ostia, where I felt like it was a little disjointed in Trajan. So going into the peer review for what others have said about this game in the years that it has been on Kickstarter, and for people to allow to see, on Tabletop Simulator as well as in person, some people said that this game felt pretty smooth to play as far as pros are concerned, has a lot of strategic depth as well, and the progression is great. So I feel like that's true, especially when you have a randomized setup that can lead to different focuses from game to game, that can feel strategically different from game to game. And the way that this game scales as well, I think is what people, in terms of the resources and the amount of ships that you have on your Mancala board, can really create for an expansive experience when you play this game. A lot of people enjoy the Mancala mechanism, and the production in person is pretty good as well. However, some people felt like the endgame trigger, the way that this game is very similar to how Yokohama ends. So when there are a couple of different ways this game can end. For example, once someone has reached 3 of the 4 ending spots on the central board, I believe, if all the amphora are collected as well, etc. So there are a lot of different conditions, and so sometimes that could be surprising and leave people lacking as to being able to put together a nice combination, to gain a lot of points at the end of the game. A lot of people felt like there wasn't a lot of interaction in this game. It felt like a multiplayer solitaire where you are trying to solve the puzzle of your own Mancala, without a lot of elements to combat. I suppose more of the interaction is placing buildings on this pirate expansion board is one major point of interaction. If you pass a port, anyone can build there as long as your ship has already passed it. And so So there's not a lot of blocking per se on the central board, right? And of course, the orders that you're trying to fulfill, there's minor interactions there. Scoring can be pretty tedious. I feel like that is true because, with the expansive track that you're scoring with, you're kind of multiplying a lot of those points based off of the icons and the number of buildings that you scored. It's a high scoring game, and so it could take a while for you to calculate your score. And I didn't really dive into what these strategies were, but some felt that there are strategies that feel dominant in this game. So, so the variability in setup can lead to unbalanced experiences. Sure, that's just inherent in the nature of the game being set up as it is, and for you to take advantage of if you spot those differences. And then a lot of people mentioned, they would rather play Trajan. A lot of people also mentioned Crusaders, Thy Will Be Done. That is a game that I've played. It's on Board Game Arena and totally forgot it. It's another Mancala-based game where I feel like there is, from what I remember, a lot more of an interactive experience. And so if that is something that you would rather have in a game that utilizes a Mancala, then Crusaders would be a good one to try. But if you, I guess, like a more multiplayer solitaire version of that, and maybe like myself, have not really enjoyed Trajan as the majority of board game players do, then Ostia might be up your alley. But let's take that and segue into my first impressions of Ostia. So with my criteria, which I base off my reviews and first impressions, going over Ostia, I give it a 7.4 out of 10. I think the rules are pretty straightforward and pretty easy to learn, especially if you're familiar with the Mancala system and have a familiarity with a lot of these Euro-style mechanisms. I feel like the strategic avenues are interesting, but it kind of, going along with replayability, I feel like this game can feel pretty similar from game to game once you kind of get a hold of it and understand what you're trying to look for. I don't think there's a wide variety of different strategies that you can focus on. Essentially looking at collecting different buildings, putting out different buildings, a lot of different ships as well, and or the set collection elements along the way, as well as these end game opportunities with these ships, right? I think the additional building spaces that you have with the pirate board adds a lot of variability to this game, and I think the initial setup for this game can create for a different puzzle each time you solve it, but essentially I think taking the same kind of actions and kind of rinsing and washing through it in this setting doesn't create as drastically different, a drastic difference of how this game kind of plays out in the long run. Another game that I thought of that kind of utilizes a Mancala that's kind of hidden is Arc Nova, right? And so in Arc Nova, you have your action cards that are lined up from 1 to 5 in terms of power, and you can simply just pick the card under the 5th action spot and just utilize that for its most potent action, right, every time, and kind of go in a cycle or a rondelle, right, as you take those actions. But a lot of that game has, one, variability based off of a different and large amount of cards, and two, the different maps that you play on as well offer that sense of variability that leads to a lot of mastery. And in this game, it's very similar to how I feel about Yokohama, where a lot of the setup randomness is done so by these tiles, but a lot of, I guess, that's the extent of what this game is going to be when it comes to the differences from game to game. You're not going to have a modular board other than these tiles. You're not going to have other, like the set collection cards aren't that, they're just turn in resources for some others and for points, right? And so it's not terribly exciting. I would say that you can gain a lot of ongoing abilities in Yokohama that are seen here in these tiles as well. So it is comparable, but I feel like there's a lot more of that setup randomness and interesting variability in Yokohama compared to Ostia. So for me, it's less fun of a game than I think Yokohama would be in the long run, but I do applaud this game for being a pretty streamlined version of some of these other games like Crusaders, Trajan, Yokohama, and approaching the way that a lot of those games might, it might be a little bit too hard of a puzzle to wrap your head around when you look at the game state right at the beginning of the game. Versus here, I feel like it's pretty, it's a lot easier to step into and understand what you need to try to do in this game and what your order of turns may be. One comment that I agree with in the Board Game Geek comments is that this game can have a pretty similar start every round because you have a little bit of variability, setup variability, in where some of these ships might be, but you start pretty small and pretty predictably as you try to just move your ship across these different routes. And once you do so, then you start to compound the amount of resources that you can get, the amount of buildings that you can build with more ships that you put out as well, and it can really snowball into having really big turns and having really cool combinations. One action in particular that I want to mention is the administration action, where you can essentially take two different turns on the same turn, and so this really mitigates the I guess not the randomness, but just the way that perhaps your Mancala rondel can be kind of stagnated at times, where you take up a lot of cool actions and then have to rebuild slowly. If you save enough ships to either pick up from or land on the administration action, you will be able to utilize some of those other actions that maybe you would want to do back to back. Or if the way that the ships are aligned, if you can't take that certain action immediately, then you can hopefully have that administration action to kind of take a freebie wild turn to do what you want to do. And so I thought that was an excellent addition to this game that really makes the Mancala shine. But other than that, that's kind of why I give a mechanism strength of 8. I think that was really neat. I do agree with a lot of people saying that the expansion really adds enough complexity to this game to make it more interesting on playthrough, and I'm glad that I played with this at first. I would recommend that as well. Otherwise, the base game is, somewhat interesting and okay to learn from, but I think in the long run, this new expansion really adds to this game. So, yeah, a lot of people prefer Trajan over this game, Crusaders as well. A lot of people who enjoy those games say that this one kind of felt like second best or third best to those. And me personally, I would rather play Yokohama than Ostia, but I think I would rather play Ostia over those other Mancala games. Even Five Tribes. I just find this game a little bit more engaging. It's a lot easier for me to wrap my head around what's going on. It probably won't serve as a very skillful game in the long run, but it would be a fun game to return to if someone suggested it. I guess that's where I'm at. So those are my first impressions of Ostia. Let me know what you think about this game if you've played it. Thank you for consulting with me today. I hope you schedule an appointment with your board gaming doctor real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.